Hey guys, I'm Matt. Welcome to the MrMaple Show.
And I'm Tim. We really appreciate you watching today. Make sure you like, subscribe, and share. Definitely smash that like button.
Guys, we get a commonly asked question because Tim and I often talk about pruning to increase variegation. And so we've had a lot of you requests that we do a video about that. This specifically works on the Oridono Nishiki-style variegation. You'll see that prevalent in many different trees, from Asahi Zuru to cotton candy. Now, Oridono Nishiki is the one here behind us. It's one of the most famous ones for this swirling pink and white style variegation. By lightly pruning at the right time of the year, you can actually increase the variegation on this plant.
We've got so many questions about this, so we're going to start off showing you a larger tree, then we're going to go to the nursery and show you how to prune on a smaller tree. And behind us, we've got Acer palmatum Oridono Nishiki. I mean, this is an old tree. This tree actually was in Simpsonville, South Carolina. One of our good friends, Richard Bomar, said, hey, you can have my Oridono Nishiki. And his didn't show much variegation at the time. We brought it back and we trunk cut it pretty heavy. And we used a saw and cut it back, and then it came out with crazy variegation. Richard came by to visit us and he said,
wow, where'd you get that Oridono?
Where'd you get that Oridono? I said, that came from you, and he couldn't believe it.
Right.
But you don't have to just trunk cut a Japanese maple to really get good variegation. We're here in late February, and this is the time for us in Western North Carolina to prune back this tree, to give it that light stress needed to show that variegation. J.D. Veritrees often said in his books, he said, you want to put these Oridono styles in an area where they get a light stress to really show the best variegation. Well, by pruning on it, you can give a positive light stress, promotes growth, and gives a lot of good variegation.
So we've got a few tools here. Tim's got a small step ladder. We've got a pair of hammer pruners. Now you could use concave if you're cutting smaller stuff. I've also brought our long pole pruners. We use these a lot for collecting soundwood, but they work great if you're going to make any cuts up high on an older tree.
Yeah, and if you've got a ladder, be careful because it is a ladder. I mean, it's easy to fall off of. It'd be good if you use a larger ladder to definitely make sure you have somebody who's holding the ladder for you, and make sure you have a sturdy ladder. I mean, this is a pretty good sturdy ladder. It's not too big, so I'm not too worried about falling off of this particular one.
Okay, Dad, let's get into it.
So whenever we're pruning here, we've got a lot of branches, and people say, what do I prune? Well, prune. I mean, that's the name of the game, is prune these back. What I often do is I'll find a set of branches and I'll cut out, yeah, that's a big piece of branching there. I'll cut back where there's actually branches forming right here. And so you can actually look in here and you see the two branches coming from that. I've cut out a decent sized branch.
We want to cut older growth and twiggier growth, especially on older, more mature trees. By taking out some of that twiggier growth, we're going to encourage a more positive xylem flow. We're actually going to increase the vigor of the tree, and so we're going to push out tons of new growth. Now, by cutting deeper back into the tree, we're going to create a scenario where we're getting more variegation expressed.
And the more you prune on this tree during this time of the year, the more pink and white swirling you'll get in the bark.
Here's some of that chimeral swirling here in the bark. Now, when you're cutting back heavier, you're going to get more of this in the Oridono Nishiki Versicolor style Japanese maples.
And the more variegation you're going to get across this plant. I mean, it sounds crazy, but you don't want to prune out more than 50% of this tree at one time. But you can really cut back this plant and cause a good positive stress that will get this plant a lot of variegation.
Now, this specific plant hasn't been pruned in several years, and so there's a lot of twiggier growth going on in here. A uniform opening up of this. So taking out any of the twiggier growth, any of the conflicting branches. You can watch our full video on how to prune a Japanese maple. If you simply do that, you're going to increase variegation.
Now, one thing to be noted, we're using clean tools here. We've cleaned our tools with rubbing alcohol. You want to make sure that you're doing that anytime you're pruning out in the landscape and garden. If you don't use clean tools, you could be spreading something from something you've trimmed that's dead to this plant when you're pruning. So remember, when you are pruning a tree, you're making surgical cuts. Make sure that, one, your tools are sharp, but also that they're clean. So the idea here is just to prune quite a bit. And we can go around and do some of this lower stuff off the ladder. And we're just cutting this tree back to give it that positive stress to promote growth. Any dead wood, just go ahead and take that out when you're doing this. It might as well. And the more you prune back this tree, and I like to use these pass-through pruners when we're doing this. If you're making smaller cuts, those concaves are great, but if you start to cut on a tree with your concave pruners that's a little bit too big, You can break your concaves, and those get to be really expensive.
Yeah, Joshua Roth Pro Grades, we use those a lot here. And anything slightly bigger to pencil, you want to go ahead and upgrade to the hammer trimmers. Nothing is more disappointing than thinking you can cut it and having to make that cut twice. When you start to cut and it doesn't go all the way through, you've already messed your pruners up. Now guys, by doing a heavy pruning on this tree, we're actually going to increase that chimeral variegation in the bark. So you're going to see a swirling in the bark. You're often going to get more of that candy stripe pink in the bark with also white chimeral variegation throughout it. So you're going to be increasing that throughout the plant by cutting back. You're going to see that more expressed in the new growth this spring.
Now I've went around and I've got a number of these branches cut back pretty heavily, but I left a lot of those tips. I even like to go back then after I've did that deep cut on those branches. I like to go back and prune back those tips. And that's just go back one set of nodes at least and cut those off. And when you do that, you can increase that variegation even more. I mean, the more you prune on this tree, you give it that positive light stress, the better that variegation is going to be. Remember, if you're doing this, you don't want to be fertilizing a lot. If you're fertilizing these variegated types, even when you're pruning this out, you may be causing more of that green to come back in by adding the fertilizer.
You're going to mute it up a good bit with high nitrogen. Go low on that, and you're going to see the best variegation. Guys, let's cut to some 1 gallons and show you a little bit of how you can do this on smaller trees.
So now, since we've seen how to do it on a larger plant, now we're standing with a smaller plant. We've got Acer palmatum cotton candy. Again, this is one of those Oridono Nishiki, Asahi Zuru styles of variegation with that swirling variegation. So the more I can trim this back and give it a light stress, the more this plant, when it pushes off new growth in the spring, will have outstanding variegation. Now, when we do this and we start pruning this plant back, people often say, well, how much should I cut back a small plant? Well, you don't want to cut out more than 50% of the plant at one time, but the really cool thing is you can cut it back to a set of nodes. So a set of nodes on the new growth flush. So you see here's the first set of buds, cut right above that. One set of buds, cut right above that. And when you do that, this here has a set of nodes with 2 buds that are right here on this side, right here. And what I've done is I've came up and cut right above the very first set of nodes or the very first set of buds, leaving those buds to leaf out in the spring. And you can do that with each and every branch. And that sounds crazy, that seems radical. But what happens is you have a much prettier, much more variegated plant in the early spring. And if you do this, what you'll end up getting is a plant that gets so variegated, it even gets swirling in the bark. And then that adds a candy striping winter interest to the plant as well. So the more you can prune on these in this late February, early March timeframe, right before leaf out, right as those buds are thinking about swelling, that is the very best time. And you see, I'm cutting back a lot of this. And this is grafting season, so I'm not going to waste this. I'm actually going to graft cotton candy. But a lot of times, if you're not grafting, you can just take this, throw this with your trash where you're pulling weeds up and stuff, and don't worry about this and all this popping out. That's going to be extremely variegated. And with cotton candy, we're going to get the most variegation we can out of this plant by pruning it this time of the season. And you see, I pruned some 1 gallons and I pruned them back pretty heavily. I'm not worried about it. You may see a little bit of sap starting to flow during this time of the season. Not worried about it. The plants won't bleed out, no matter what some people will say, oh, your plants are going to bleed out. That's perfectly normal to see some sap coming from them during this time of the season. They're at their most healing point right now in this late February, late winter, early spring time frame. They heal very, very quickly. So when there's putting that sap, it's actually starting to heal during that same process. Perfectly normal. You do this, these plants are just going to be exploding with variegation in the spring. So go out, prune your Japanese maples. This is a great way to do it. Again, now you've seen me do it on a 1 gallon plant. And as you see, I pruned out a heck of a lot of it and not worried about it. But if you prune it at these sets of buds, you're going to really give it a good positive stress that promotes growth and promotes variegation. So I hope you enjoyed today's video on how to prune these Oridono Nishiki styles, this unique style of variegation, to promote even more variegation on these plants. Take care, God bless, and have a great day.